Welcome into another episode of the Swamp247 podcast. My name is Jacob Rudner, and today I am joined by a special guest, Mr. David Lake, over from our Miami site within the 24/7 Sports Network. David is going to help us to preview the Miami Hurricanes ahead of the season opening matchup between the Florida Gators and number 19 Miami in Gainesville on August 31st. So, David, first and foremost, thank you for joining us. And yeah, we're looking forward to gaining your insights today.
Yeah, we both made it through camp here. I know we've both been looking forward to this game. Game week is essentially here, and now we get to actually watch these teams in action.
Yeah, I guess that is a great transition into what I think is an easy opening here, which is kind of tell us about the changes that have occurred over the course of the last couple months in Coral Gables. I know that this is a very different team than the last one Mario Cristobal put on the field. What can fans kind of expect? What are some of the broad strokes changes that you've seen occur, I guess, recently?
Yeah, I mean they definitely went all in with the transfer portal, as we already knew right from spring football with the addition of Cam Ward. He was certainly a big piece to what they're going to be this year. But even in the spring transfer portal window, which was after Miami's spring game, they went out and added a feature running back in Damian Martinez. They went out and added what they hope is wide receiver one in Sam Brown. They solidified some depth and added talent on the defensive line as well with Tyler Barron from Tennessee and Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. So they are, in my estimation, going into the season, we will see how it plays out when the games are here. But I do think they are talented and deep at most position groups. We'll get into it, but secondary, I think, is still one to watch. But overall, on paper, in my estimation, this team looks pretty legitimate in terms of they should be competing for an ACC championship this year.
I think it's always important to start with this offense. There, like you mentioned, there are so many new critical pieces, and that starts with the quarterback. What have you seen from Cam Ward over the course of the last couple months since he joined the program from Washington State? And I guess one question I have, this is a pretty sizable step up. He was very successful last year, but just the challenge of successfully moving from what used to be the Pac-12 now to an ACC conference where he will face better athletes day in and day out.
Yeah, I think that is a fair question with Cam. I think one thing that the Miami staff is excited about with Cam Ward as it relates to who he is replacing, they feel like they are essentially getting a pro that's still at the college level, both with his ability, right? He's got all the requisite arm talent, he has the pocket presence, he has the accuracy, he understands where to go with the ball. So he checks all those boxes. But really, what impresses Miami's staff is his competitive responses to adversity whenever they pop up during scrimmages or games or practices, etc. How he responds to those situations, and also just his preparation. He is, that cliche first guy in the building. That hasn't been the case at Miami, honestly, for quite some time at the quarterback position. So he is a focused individual. I think he is a guy that has a tremendous chip on his shoulder. And that goes back to his time as a high school recruit when he had to go to Incarnate Word and prove himself there. He was a true freshman starter there, played 2 years at Incarnate Word, succeeded at that level, made the leap to Washington State, that Power Four level. And now, as you are alluding to, I would agree, he's making another leap to an ACC conference where I think there's going to be more competition. I think as it relates to this Florida game, this is going to be the toughest environment he has played in to this point of his college career. But he has made leaps before, and he is a motivated individual to go out and show what he can do.
We've seen him be successful to some degree in the past with his ability to score touchdowns with his legs. I think he scored 8 touchdowns in his last season at Washington State. But of course, with Cam Ward, as is the case with a lot of these Incarnate Word quarterbacks, they have huge arms and they're able to kind of deliver in these air raid style offenses, which he did. How does he kind of fit into what Miami is trying to do schematically on offense? And if you could, what can Florida fans expect to see, from a an X's and O's standpoint in on August 31st?
Yeah, their passing game is definitely air raid principles. So, and Cam Ward has that mobility element, but he is definitely a pocket passer. He wants to do his damage from the pocket, and he is now playing behind an offensive line that is much better than what he played with at Washington State. So he is excited about that. But yeah, in terms of what this offense is, I think they want to blend an air raid passing system kind of with a power running game, inside zone running game that Mario Cristobal and his offensive line coach Alex Mirabal are famous for running. They established that system at Oregon and they've brought it to Miami. So they try to blend those two systems together. And now they have the personnel to see how it all looks. It's kind of been disjointed at times. Again, year one of Mario was not an air raid system; it was a different offense. But last year, we saw the highs of it against a Texas A&M. That was Miami's best offensive showing last season and of the Mario Cristobal era. But then things kind of fell apart due to quarterback confidence, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, they want to blend an air raid system, spread you out, also use the tight ends, and then they also want to pound you with a power run game with running back Damian Martinez, who goes 230 pounds, and the guys behind him as well.
Tell me about that offensive line. Just you mentioned Damian Martinez and how important the run game is going to be for them this year. Obviously, Cam Ward is a pocket passer. He likes to use his big arm. How's that unit kind of come together?
Yeah, so coming into the season, right, they had to replace two of last year's starters. So last year, all five guys started, all five of their starters started the regular season together, which is very rare, as you know. But they battled through injuries and just got that done, right? And two of those guys went on to be drafted. The center Matt Lee and the left guard Javian Cohen, who was a transfer from Alabama last year. So they moved on to the NFL. So Miami's, had to plug those two spots. They added center Zach Carpenter from Indiana. So he's going to be your starting center. And left guard was kind of an open competition. If I'm projecting it, I would assume it'll be Matt McCoy, who is largely untested. He's kind of played, I don't know, maybe 100 to 150 offensive snaps during his career. He's a third year player. So he's developed in their system, but just largely untested. Certainly has the size at 6'6", 300 plus. But the guys they are returning, I think, are going to be in contention to be first team All ACC type guys. You have Jalen Rivers at left tackle. He's projected as an NFL draft pick, in some round at the next level. Right guard Inez Cooper, I think, is going to be a three and done type before he goes on to the NFL after this year. And then at right tackle, Francis Mauigoa returns, who was a five-star prospect, true freshman All-American last year. He returns as the right tackle and took his lumps last year as a true freshman, to be quite honest with you, but still performed well. But I think he's going to be kind of a weapon for them at right tackle this year.
Is this a unit that you feel like is going to be able to help Miami kind of take that next step forward offensively? What's the progress looking like year to year over the course of even the last 3 years now?
Quite frankly, I think their offensive line was excellent last year. Tyler Van Dyke, the quarterback last year, I think the stat from Pro Football Focus was, I think he threw like 12 picks and 11 of them were with clean protection, clean pockets. And so the offensive line did their jobs last year. Now, I don't think this offensive line is going to be last year's offensive line. I think last year's offensive line featured five NFL guys. This year's offensive line, I think, features three. And so we'll see if Matthew McCoy can be that type of guy. We just don't know. And Zach Carpenter is a solid, serviceable center. So I would, if I'm comparing the two groups, this year's offensive line is not as good as last year's, but I still think it's probably the best in the ACC.
Let's talk about this wide receiver group. A lot of standout names in there. Xavier Restrepo obviously stands out to me. Samuel Brown Jacoby George. There are so many names. I feel like lots of athletes.
Right.
What can you tell us about who needs Nycar is another guy? Who should fans be keeping an eye on heading into the season opener? Who are the difference makers in this unit?
So your top three are established. It's those guys you mentioned. So Xavier Restrepo, 1,000-yard receiver last year. He works out of the slot. He's kind of your dependable guy, a guy that can really put up big numbers in this air raid offense. Jacoby George returns. He had a breakout season last year, 800 plus yards. Consistency is kind of his deal, but he is very talented and he can explode on you in any game for 100 plus yards if he puts it all together. And then Sam Brown is a transfer from Houston. He totaled 800 yards last year at Houston. Played for Shannon Dawson 2 years ago when Shannon Dawson was at Houston. And internally, they feel like he's going to be wide receiver one. He brings kind of a dynamic playmaking element to the offense with his tackle breaking ability and downfield playmaking ability. So expectations are high with Sam Brown, but the group is strong as a whole, and that's what this air raid system is kind of about, finding the open man. And then the fourth receiver is Isaiah Horton, who kind of randomly made a 50-yard touchdown against Texas A&M last year. Didn't really play much outside of that, but he goes 6'3", 6'4", 200 pounds, and can be kind of a vertical threat downfield as a go route type guy. So he's your fourth. And then Ray Joseph is a second year receiver playing the slot behind Xavier Restrepo, brings more speed to that position than Restrepo does, and he's kind of pushing his way into a rotational spot. So I would say those five are mainly the guys to know at receiver.
And then I know that Mario Cristobal's offense has historically not leaned very heavily on the tight end position. It's more of a four wide receiver set offense, and it is one that's going to constantly be relying upon the tight end, especially in the passing game. But how is that position group shaping up, and kind of what is the expectation for how it fits into this offense?
I think they're going to. So last year, they were not a big part of the offense, primarily because their number one guy, Elijah Arroyo, was still building confidence slash getting healthy from a serious non-contact knee injury he established the last year. So he was still working his way back from that. I think he only had like one catch for 11 yards on the season. And their leading receiver at that tight end position was, I believe, true freshman at that time, Riley Williams, had like 70 yards. So wasn't any production there. And, Miami's known as tight end U. And so the fan base, it's a question for the fan base going into the season. Are they going to use the tight ends? I feel very confident that they are going to make them a big part of this offense. Elijah Arroyo uh, had a strong fall camp. He looks healthy, athletic. He's kind of the guy to know in terms of the pass catching presence. Riley Williams is your 6'6", 250 kind of all around tight end, good blocker, decent receiver. And then true freshman Elijah Lofton is kind of your bowling ball tight end. It makes no sense looking at him. He's 6'4", 240, but he makes a lot of plays with his strength and he makes some crazy catches too. He can line up in the slot, line up at H-back. So they have a lot of versatility. They have a lot of depth at tight end. And I know Miami wants to improve in terms of red zone touchdown efficiency this year. And the tight end position is one in particular where that can get done. And they feel good about what they have there this year compared to last year.
And then I guess to put a bow on our conversation here about this offense, how is Damian Martinez fitting? And I know last year Miami was not a very run heavy team. I think they ranked just inside the top 100 among FBS teams in rush play percentage. Do you see that as a number that's going to grow this year with such a star studded back in the fold now? What is kind of the desired role for such a prominent player like Martinez?
I do. I think there's a desire for balance, and I do think. I mean, Damian Martinez, quite frankly, has dazzled during camp. I think a lot of people that have watched practice might even tell you he has been their best player on offense this camp. So he's a guy that I would assume they will ride heavily in this first game. He goes 6 foot 230. He has proven production, almost 1,200 yards at Oregon State. So Yes, they did not run the ball very much last year. I think that's mostly due to personnel not being to the standard where it should have been. I think this year it is with Damian Martinez. Mark Fletcher is a talented guy. We'll see what his status is. Quite frankly, I think that comes down to the wire with his recovery from his offseason deal. But they feel good about Jordan Lyle, who is a true freshman that's really come on strong during the second half of camp. And then AJ Allen is kind of your complimentary change of pace, quick back who had, 350 or so yards last year as a transfer from Nebraska. So, but the guy to know is Damian Martinez. And I think the hope internally is okay, we have Cam Ward at quarterback and Damian Martinez at running back. We should be balanced, and that should be very hard to stop.
Let's flip our focus now to the defensive side of the ball. Miami was impressive, nothing short on defense last year. There are a lot of numbers that indicate that this was a group that had some success. Just going down the list here, they were top 50 in sack percentage. They were top 20 in opponent completion percentage. They were top 20 in opponent yards per rush. This was a group that was stifling, and it sounds like it's gotten better across the board. Tell me, in a general sense, before we kind of zoom in on some of these positions, what your feel for this defense is, and just how it's grown from an already reasonably well established standpoint from 2023.
Yeah, the strength of this defense is in the front seven, and we'll get into the personnel there. But really, Lance Guidry, who was a new defensive coordinator for Miami last year, he came in from Marshall. He's very aggressive. He will load the box and he will show blitz and he'll send blitz or he won't and keep, plays that cat and mouse game with opposing quarterbacks. And I think it's very hard to get a read on what he wants to do. And I think he also does a tremendous job, quite frankly, of making in-game adjustments, understanding, if an offense is having success early, what changes need to be made to stop that success. So Lance Guidry, I think, is kind of a rising star in terms of national recognition as a defensive coordinator. And he had a and really what was most impressive is they had a lot of injuries last year on the defensive line. And in the middle of the season, they basically went from a four down front, from a 4-2-5 to a 3-3-5 defense in the middle of a season and kind of still maintained their level of effectiveness, which you don't really see that often at the college level, right? So I think he's a tremendous coach, and last year was a very encouraging year one. Now, I will say, and then we can get into personnel, but when he was at Marshall, he had similar-ish stats year one at Marshall, and then in year two at Marshall, his defense was top 10 in like 15 statistical categories that year. So can they make that type of leap in year two? We'll see. I think it's strong in the front seven, but there are some questions on the back end.
Well, let's talk about that front seven, and we'll start with the defensive line. When I look this unit over, David, I see Ruben Bain, who I think a lot of people should know at this point, and then I see a whole bunch of transfers and new faces. So tell me about how guys are starting to fit in, and maybe if you could go back into the history of this and just kind of talk about how much success Miami had with this initiative to reload its front seven, primarily through the transfer portal.
Yeah, so Ruben Bain returns, very productive freshman season, 40 plus quarterback pressures, 7 sacks. He played 600 snaps as a true freshman because he had to, because again, they had a lot of injuries up front and he just had to play a huge role and he stepped up and got the job done. So he returns. He's a versatile guy, can play DN, can play on the inside sometimes too. So he is a big starting point. Miami also returns Akeem Mesidor, who was their best defensive lineman in 2022. He suffered a season-ending foot injury against Texas A&M last year, and so he's come back. And everyone's told me that he looks better than the player he was in 2022. And if that is the case, he is a very similar type talent to Ruben Bain. So you might have two Ruben Bain type guy because Mesidor is also 6'2", 280-ish, can play inside or outside. So there's versatility there as well. They added Elijah Alston from Marshall, kind of your G5, 6'2", 245 stand-up edge rusher, but was productive at Marshall, 35 pressures at that level. With Lance Guidry, of course, who also came from Marshall. So he does a solid job in that stand-up edge rush role. Tyler Barron was a summer addition, 40 plus pressures from at Tennessee last year. Um, he kind of, in my opinion, was the cherry on top for this group because, as you know, Jacob, you can never have too many defensive linemen. Miami now feels like they have four quality proven defensive ends, in particular with Tyler Barron. He has wowed everyone in fall camp. You know, I think he could potentially sneak into the first round. He's probably round two or round three in terms of NFL draft talent, but he is that type of guy, 6'5", 260. Can also play inside at times as well. Then at D tackle, they went out and added Simeon Barrow in the summer to beef up that situation. He's a 6'2", 290 type guy from Michigan State. Brings a little bit of a pass rushing punch, but more so of an energy type guy. CJ Clark comes from NC State, kind of a 6'2", 300 type. He played in a 3-3-5 system there at NC State. So he's used to playing that kind of nose tackle, and they're excited about what they got there. Marley Cook comes from Middle Tennessee State. He was highly productive 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago he was 30 pressure type of guy at Middle Tennessee State. So he's a nice depth piece. And then one guy that's stepped up here in camp is Ahmad Moten, who's entering his third season. He's kind of emerged as their fourth defensive line or defensive tackle going into this season opener. So they're excited about that. And then a guy who, I don't know how much he'll factor into this Florida game because he is a freshman, but five-star Justin Scott has made a strong first impression here in camp. And I kind of view him as a guy that will probably play in the second half of the season, but he's definitely a name to know because he is very talented. And just in terms of like body type and movement skills, he's probably the most impressive defensive tackle they have on the roster.
I know that you mentioned last year there was kind of a transition between that 4-2-5, excuse me, to that 3-3 defense. Uh, from what I've seen in that 4-2-5, it's all Sam and Will linebacker type stuff. But what can we expect from this linebacker unit? And then schematically, do you expect them to kind of stick with more of that 3-3 look, or will things kind of smooth back out to the 4-2-5 now that this defensive line is so well established?
I think it'll mostly be a four down defense. But this is just me guessing. I would assume that if they want to go to a 3-3-5 for a specific opponent, they can do that. So, but mainly this is a four down defense. That's what they want to be. In terms of linebacker, yeah. Kiko Maui-Noa returns, highly disruptive guy last year. I think they kind of view it as two inside linebackers, is how they would describe their linebacker situation. So Kiko is kind of the lead dog there. He had 18 tackles for loss last year, 7.5 sacks. Again, Lance Guidry brings a lot of pressure. He had 25 quarterback pressures last year from the linebacker spot on something like 80 blitz snaps. So he's effective in that way as well. And then the guy that they're excited about kind of taking a next step is Wesley Basaint, who is entering his third year. He's up to about 225 now, which is the biggest he's been at Miami from a weight standpoint. And he's been solid to this point, but it is time for him to take the next step and kind of be that, top 200 four-star he was coming out of high school. And there's a lot of confidence internally that he is going to be that guy. And if he is that guy, Miami will be in the discussion as having one of the better linebacker duos in the ACC.
In the secondary, I know you mentioned that there are some question marks there. Before we get into the personnel, just for our listeners, is this a defense that plays right and left corners? Is it field and boundary for the most part? How do they kind of establish cornerbacks here?
Field and boundary is how they do it.
Okay, and I guess now tell us about what we can expect from the secondary, from the secondary. Excuse me, and who are some of the standouts?
Yeah, so Daryl Porter is kind of their top returner at corner. he's kind of your just solid veteran cornerback. He's not necessarily gonna wow you with his body type or speed, but he has good technique. He plays with good poise, and he's very difficult to beat, quite frankly. So last year, I think he was only targeted like 24 times in coverage. So quarterbacks just kind of didn't really go his way. I think that's because he does such a good job, kind of dissuading them from attacking him. But he is the veteran guy that returns as a starter year over year at corner. The nickel spot, I think, is going to be Damari Brown, who returns as a second year guy, 4-star recruit coming out of high school. I think he will go back and forth between the corner and the boundary, but I think you'll mainly see him at corner. He goes 6'1", 200, good tackler, good in coverage. I think he's perfect for that big nickel role. Then the other spot is kind of where the interesting action has been. That's been a competition that has emerged between Jadis Richard, who is a transfer from Vanderbilt. He transferred into Miami last season, didn't really play all that much. He played against Florida State and had a solid showing against them, but outside of that, didn't really play that much. He goes 6'1", 6'2", 185, 190 pounds. He is a pretty looking corner, but he is a guy that at times his technique fails him, his poise fails him, and his tackling can be up and down. And so he's kind of left the door open for a true freshman corner, OJ Frederic, who comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. He was a 3-star recruit, but he has impressed everyone with his competition, his compete level, I should say, and quite frankly, his playmaking ability. He has been their best playmaking corner this season, or sorry, this camp, and he's really pushing Jada. So they have a decision to make. I think those are your top four corners. Um, they have a decision to make in terms of, do we want to start the young guy, see how that goes, or do they go with the veteran, keep their fingers crossed, and if they got to yank that situation, they'll yank it. So that's the corner situation. I don't know if you want me to go into safety now.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So safety, they brought in Mish Powell from Washington, who I believe Florida also kicked the tires on in the transfer portal, if I remember correctly. But Mish was primarily a nickel at Washington. At Miami, he's going to be more of a safety. And, they love everything they have about him. He's kind of your smart guy on the back end that knows how to get everyone lined up, knows his positioning where he needs to be. Is he the biggest, most athletic safety? Probably not. He's not like the playmaker, for instance, that Cam Kitchens was last year, but I don't think he's going to take as many chances and as a result allow as many explosives as Cam Kitchens did last year. And then the other guy is Jaden Harris, who largely untested. He started 2 games last year when Cam Kitchens was injured a little bit, but those 2 games, I believe, were Bethune and Temple. So he's largely untested, but he is, according to the GPS system at Miami, he's the fastest player on the team at 23 miles an hour. And he is praised for his work ethic and willingness to learn the defense, etc. So those are your two safeties. Quite frankly, the depth after them, to me, in my opinion, gets a little dicey. Markeith Williams is probably your third safety, in my opinion, going into the season. And so, yeah, it's largely it's not a group that's going to scare you in terms of playmaking ability. I think the hope is Miami's defensive line can help this group look better and perform better. And I think the hope is that this group uh, can put forth some trustworthy performances in terms of they won't take chances, and they'll just make the safe plays, as they come to them.
So, David, I have two more kind of broad questions for you before we wrap up here. What's one thing that when you look at this entire Miami team, and it can be anything, what's one thing that excites you about this group that you think is going to help it be as successful as it wants to be this season? And what's maybe one thing that you look at with this team and you go, I'm not so sure about that, or that's a question that I need to have answered in the first couple weeks of the season to really reinforce whether or not you believe that they're going to be able to achieve their goals.
Yeah, I am a believer and I am excited in Cam Ward and his leadership ability and his, you know, performance that I think is going to come for this season as a whole. I think, the last two seasons, when games didn't start Miami's way, I think the quarterbacks would get in their own heads and things would avalanche on them, and it led to losses that they shouldn't be losing, quite frankly. So I think Cam Ward understands how to lead a team, hold players accountable, and I think he also has the talent to go out and perform well in his own right. So I am excited. I think, you know, this is probably hot takey maybe for fans outside of the Miami fan base, but he is, to me, he's going to be by far the best quarterback Miami's had since Ken Dorsey. Now, that is not like the most impressive list, but that is 20 plus years ago. So it's been a long time since Miami's had a quarterback like Cam Ward. In terms of concerns, look, I don't know if this is like the type of answer you're looking for, but my concerns as it relates to Miami this year, just in general, and this is every year, quite frankly, here recently, has to more so do with like culture and like understanding how to navigate a whole season, how to handle adverse situations. Because look, Miami kind of always enters a season with hype. That's always the case. And more times than not, they don't live up to that hype. Now, I think that's amplified a little bit this year, and I think on paper that's fair. I think on paper, Miami is a top 15, maybe top 12, maybe top 10 type of team on paper. But why does Miami never live up to what they should be on paper? I don't really have the answer to that. I think that's something they got to go out and figure out, and again, navigate an entire season. And to me, that's honestly bigger than like just this Florida game, because if Miami goes out and loses this Florida game, they can still go out and win the ACC, and they need to embrace that and understand that and go achieve that. So um, I guess it's kind of more of like a culture thing, and that's kind of like a harder thing to put your thumb on, and maybe that doesn't necessarily apply to a game one against Florida. But that would be just in general my biggest concern. In addition, as it relates to this game, we talked about it when you came on my podcast a little bit, Jacob, but like going into this road environment, I think is a significant factor. And how does Miami navigate that? I think that is a big question from a Miami standpoint going into this game. So I don't know if I answered that question, but that's what I would say.
No, that was perfect, and that I think that's going to actually put a bow on this entire conversation. David, we thank you so much for joining us over on the Swamp247 podcast. Make sure that you go and check out David and the rest of the Inside the U team's work over at insidetheu.com. David, we appreciate your time and looking forward to seeing you up here in Gainesville.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jacob.
All righty. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. Again, my name is Jacob Rudner, and this time it was Mr. David Lake who joined us on the show. We will see you next time.